for inviting me to this fascinating meeting. And just before lunch, I want to introduce you to my perspective of longevity. This is my disclosures. I believe exercise is good for you, so you may take that into consideration when you hear my talk. I'm very stimulated by this recent publication showing that 8 lifestyle habits could add up to 24 years to your life. In this study, they showed that especially exercise had an impact on longevity. Our role here is to identify some mechanism underlying the effects of exercise. Our contribution has been to contribute to the development of this whole concept of exercise and of muscle as an endocrine organ. Muscle produces several molecules that we have called myokines, and some of these myokines have impact on metabolism and on inflammation. I want to focus my talk on the myokine IL-6 and tell you that there is the good, the bad, and the ugly. I will focus on the myokine IL-6. Of note, the IL-6 cytokine and the IL-6 myokine have very different signaling pathways. In exercise, muscle produces IL-6 without a preceding increase in TNF. So IL-6 increases in an exponential fashion with exercise and stimulates the occurrence of anti-inflammatory cytokines. It's also very clear that IL-6 is an energy sensor, so if muscle glycogen is slow, much more IL-6 is produced. And together with Professor Daniel Lieberman, we have shown that IL-6 also works as an energy allocator during exercise. So if you block endogenous IL-6 in humans, it impairs mobilization of free fatty acids during rest and exercise. It's very clear that IL-6 has many effects. It has many effects, especially on lipid metabolism. But it also has, both acutely and on a long-term basis, anti-inflammatory effects. It is a paradox because we know that high levels of IL-6 are associated with all the bad things in life, and then at the same time acute exercise produces these up to 100-fold increase in IL-6. So is IL-6 a bad guy or a good guy? So in acute studies, it's very clear that IL-6 induces beneficial metabolic effects. So we looked at TNF and asked whether TNF was actually the bad guy, and we know that TNF stimulates IL-6, so in the epidemiological study you might find correlations with high IL-6 and all the bad things in life, but is it simply because it reflects ongoing TNF production? So to study this, we infused TNF to humans together with an insulin clamp and the glucose tracers. I was the first person to have an injection of TNF. I was without blood pressure for 3 hours, so this is a very powerful molecule. Then we repeated the study with small doses of TNF and showed that TNF induces skeletal muscle insulin resistance, and we also identified a mechanism. So TNF inhibits AS160 phosphorylation. So what we did was that we then suggested that maybe IL-6 would simply feedback and inhibit TNF. So to test that, we used E. coli endotoxin and infused E. coli endotoxin to humans. We stimulated TNF. We did that at rest, and with exercise inhibited the increase in TNF, and we could mimic that by an infusion of IL-6. So acutely, IL-6 produces a myokine, IL-6, which inhibits TNF and stimulates anti-inflammatory cytokines. But there's also a long-term effect on inflammation, which includes an effect on visceral fat. We know that the physical inactivity leads to accumulation of visceral fat. I'll just show you this in a study we published in JAMA some years ago. And here we have asked young healthy men to decline their daily number of steps from 10,000 to 1,500 steps per day for 14 days. Of course, fitness decreased. They lost body weight, 1.2 kilo in average, due to a decrease in muscle mass. When we did an oral fat tolerance test, you could see that the lipids were much higher. In the upper left corner, you can see that Sometimes the plasma became milky with an ODTT, which indicated insulin resistance, which was confirmed by an insulin clamp. Stable isotopes showed us that the insulin-stimulated peripheral glucose uptake was markedly inhibited, and biopsies showed us that this was due to an inhibition of insulin signaling, especially due to an effect on phosphorylation of AS160, which is a key molecule in GLUT4 translocation. And then we did an MR scan, and you can see at the arrows that in 14 days of decreased stepping, there was an accumulation of visceral fat. So just 14 days of laziness, my student called this 14 days at Mallorca all-inclusive study. We found a decrease in glucose uptake, impaired insulin signaling, hyperlipidemia, loss of muscle mass and fitness, and increased visceral fat. So there is documentation also in humans that inactivity leads to accumulation of visceral fat independent of body weight. We know that visceral fat is more inflamed than subcutaneous fat and can create a systemic inflammatory environment which can influence, in essence, all cells in the body and contribute to the development of many different diseases. Now we asked if IL-6 was the link, and we hypothesized that if we blocked IL-6, then we would also reduce an effect on adipose tissue following exercise training. In this study, we recruited people with obesity and randomized them to exercise training for 12 weeks with or without an inhibition of TNF, or to 2 control groups with or without an inhibition of IL-6. And we found that, as we expected, that exercise training reduces the amount of visceral fat, but this was totally blunted when the subjects received an antibody against IL-6 receptor. So IL-6 is required for exercise-mediated reduction in adipose tissue, and another study we showed that IL-6 signaling is also required for epicardial fat loss and cardiac muscle hypertrophy following exercise training. So what is happening here? We hypothesized that IL-6 blockade could create fatty acid overflow and ectopic fat accumulation. And here we showed palmitate overflow from subcutaneous fat in the postprandial phase during IL-6 blockade. And we found that during IL-6 blockade, there's more 13C labeled palmitate in the plasma coming from the abdominal subcutaneous adipose tissue, which may favor accumulation of ectopic fat. This was not due to an effect on LPL activity, but IL-6 blockade inhibits postprandial increase in CD36, the transporter molecule. So we believe that when we block IL-6, we see the fatty acid overflow, and that could favor ectopic fat accumulation, and this is mediated by an effect on the transporter. So this is a paradox, because then why is it that elevated resting levels of IL-6 is accompanying abdominal obesity? It should be the opposite. So we now had to come up with a hypothesis, and we suggested that IL-6 resistance exists. And in order to test that, we included a cohort of people with and without diabetes, lean or obese. We took muscle biopsies, created muscle cell stem cells, and just to confirm that in controls, insulin stimulates glucose uptake, but not in the diabetic people. We also found that IL-6 enhances AMPK activity in the primary muscle cell cultures from the healthy subjects, but this was abolished in the diabetic people. Then we infused IL-6 to insulin-resistant or control subjects and found, as we expected, that IL-6 infusion enhanced lipolysis and fat oxidation, but this was not the case in the insulin-resistant people. So I think we can conclude that both in vitro and in vivo data suggest that insulin resistance is accompanied also by IL-6 resistance. So again, IL-6 seems to play a role in metabolism. In this little study, I'll just show you also that IL-6 can have an impact on glucose. So we wanted to study the role of IL-6 in the classical fight or flight response. We could not bring a lion into the laboratory, so we asked humans to do high-intensity interval training, and this is really a very demanding protocol. So they did that with and without IL-6 receptor blockade, and just a few data here. Here you see the effect of exercise on epinephrine, and you can see IL-6 blockade partly blocks the increase in catecholamines during intense exercise, and also block the effect on the liver glucose output. So we think this is very interesting that this molecule released by the muscle during exercise has impact on liver glucose output. We are very interested in how exercise has impact different diseases, and I will not have time to go through all the data that we gather or that there is in the world. I'll just give you a little insight in some data on cancer. It's well known that exercise decreases the risk of at least 13 cancers. It has also been known for many years that if you start exercising after a diagnosis, that you will have an increased survival. But fantastically, it was fantastic to see during this summer this study that has been going on for 15 years, that structured exercise training for 3 years reduces mortality risk for colon cancer by 37%. Come up with a drug that can do the same, and I will be very interested. What is the mechanism? We have been interested in that in many years. I'll just give you a little insight into that. So late, Pernille Højmand, a very talented group leader, she did mice studies. The mice either had a wheal or no wheal. In this study, she used malignant melanoma. This is the lungs of the mice who did not have access to a wheal. And here you see the results of the mice who had access to the wheel and who could do voluntary exercise. Across many different cancer models, this is typically what we find. And one mechanism that at least plays a role in this model is that when the mice exercise, epinephrine increases, it will lead to a recruitment of natural killer cells, and due to release of IL-6 from the muscle, these natural killer cells are then going to the tumor and can control tumor growth. Has this any relevance for cancer patients? Yes, we think so. At least we know that cancer patients are able to mobilize NK cells to the blood during exercise, and we also have some data now showing that natural killer cells are recruited to the tumor site in patients with prostate cancer if they exercise between the time of diagnosis and the time of surgery. So certainly in vitro and a few in vivo data suggest that myokines are also mediating anti-cancer effects. So this was a little insight into our interest in muscle as an endocrine organ, the role of myokine. I've just given you some example of cardiometabolic effects and anti-inflammatory effects, and we can suggest that exercise can contribute to a long health span and a long lifespan. I know that it's not all finished by demonstrating this, because this is what we are facing, even in Copenhagen, where you see a lot of people on a bicycle, but this is just what you see. So the big question that I cannot answer today is, how do we close the gap between knowledge and practice and translate basic research both to clinical practice and even to political statements, while we are still seeing a huge polarization in exercise pattern. In our research center, which we call a Translation Research Center, I have given you some insights into the yellow, the blue, and the green circle, and we are also trying to see if we can answer some of the question about what do we actually do to change behavior globally. So I want to thank the many people in our group, and this is also a picture of people who have contributed during the many years. And then in the interest of time, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bente. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Maybe I can start. So you have a strong focus on the myokine effects on exercise. I'm wondering about how about glucose homeostasis, and how big does that contribute to
longevity?
To longevity or the health benefits compared to like the...
Of course, glucose homeostasis is an extremely important factor. Insulin resistance in itself is extremely important, but it's also to some extent regulated very much by lifestyle factors and the way exercise influence glucose homeostasis and insulin resistance, and even also beta cell function is mediated to some extent by myokines.
It's a fantastic talk, fantastically thought-provoking too. If we accept that exercise is medicine, with any medicine, the immediate question is, what's the dose and dosage regimen?
Yeah.
Have you done research to sort of figure out the optimal dosages of exercise, so to speak?
Yes, we and others have done a lot of those studies, and it's very clear that if you do not take the exercise pill, as I showed in the inactivity study, just within 14 days, many organs are influenced. And it is so that, little is better than nothing, and there is a dose-dependent effect up to a certain limit. And in continuation with Charlotte Sueda's talk, I think the best we can recommend to most of the patients is a combination of strength training and aerobic training. But of course, we try to see if we can make a more sophisticated prescription of exercise depending on the diagnosis.
Thank you so much, Bente. That was a fantastic talk.